Ghost Facers to What to Watch Now, where we talk about what's streaming on Netflix right now. And today we are returning back to one of my favorite shows, Supernatural, Season 1, Episode 17, Hellhouse. Guys, I am so sorry I took a break from Supernatural. It was not on purpose at all. In fact, if I could, I would make this a Supernatural-only podcast. But so many movies ended up popping up in Netflix that I was like, okay, I have to cover these first. So it ended up taking longer than I had anticipated. But, you know, today's kind of like one of those days where I'm like, fuck it. I want to talk about what I want to talk about. And so I'm doing Supernatural. I'm back. This is like, oh my god. I remember I said not that long ago that Scarecrow is one of the pinnacle defining episodes of Supernatural, and I would still say that is absolutely true. But I would say the second runner-up, at least for its lore and well-known side characters, is this Hellhouse, the introduction to the iconic duo Ghostfacers, aka Ed Zeddmore, played by A.J. Buckley, and Harry Spangler, also played by Travis Wester. I hope I wrote his name right. Webster? Wester, I think it is. Anyways, this has everything in addition to the introduction to Ghostfacers that represents like campfire tales. The idea around the whisper down the lane effect of myths and ghost stories, and just the general conversation and idea about the power of belief and how it affects. I mean, the power of belief kind of finds its way into everything, your fears, your relationships with other people. But we're specifically talking about the supernatural world. And I'm not even talking just the TV show. I'm referring to ghosts too, but I'm going to go into all of that in this episode. Before anything, I just want to say, please become a Patreon supporter today. We're working on a bunch of cool stuff. And feel free to subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And above all, please tell a friend about this podcast. I love doing this podcast, and it cannot grow without your help. So, tweet a little something at me, or go home or go to school and tell a friend that I exist. I would appreciate that so much. Overall, I mean, even this is how much I love this podcast. On a side note, that Supernatural episodes are not one of my more viewed ones, but I genuinely try to focus on talking about stuff that I think people should be watching and will fill their life with happiness and information and so on and so forth. So even if it's not more findable or accessible via search results, I'm still going to talk about it, because my hope is you will find me some way, some shape or form or how through maybe another movie or show, and then be like, oh, look at this whole list of other cool stuff I can check out. I trust their opinion on X, Y, and Z. I'll try out this other stuff I haven't before. So, Supernatural. It starts off, again, I love when they talk about all the cliches. We've got a group of kids daring each other to go into a haunted house, being led by one member in particular. Apparently he, quote-unquote, heard it from his cousin. And there's a whole story about girls being strung up alive. Ooh, very scary. And of course, it's a bit creepy. They are a little freaked out and messing around, but they don't really think they're going to find anything until they literally run into a girl hung up. It's terrifying. I can't even understand how scary that must have been for them. And it goes next level, because when they went to go tell the police about it, they might have not even been sure if what they experienced was supernatural or not. Gets confirmed when they go to the police, and nobody's there. So that means they definitely, like, people's experiences with ghosts, especially when it's an absolute clear apparition, is terrifying. It leaves you speechless, especially when people have had experiences where they can touch the entity. There's some sort of physical contact, because we say to ourselves, we're safe. We cannot be harmed by ghosts. And that's a kind of a reassuring, naive idea we have to comfort us on something that seems inexplainable or shouldn't exist. So, we go back to Sam and Dean, and this is when we get you could say it's temporarily starts, temporarily ends, but honestly, for seasons and seasons goes on, the iconic, adorable prank war. I say adorable because on one hand, I appreciate that the show doesn't make its pranks insensitive, like a lot of, do you remember when like prank YouTubers were a thing and it was terrible? All the quote unquote social experiments they were doing and how offensive they were, but they kept trying to blame it on it's a prank. Well, I appreciate that it's not mean or callous like that, but on the other hand, literally, a prank doesn't count for Dean putting a spoon in Sam's mouth and then turning it up. I mean, we didn't get to see it, but apparently he put Nair in his shampoo. That for sure is a mean, but for sure is a prank. Anyways, so goofy little silly stuff like that. So they do that throughout this episode with each other. But they go to this because they hear about a girl being strung up and that when people returned, there was no one there. That's enough for them to, go on. Which, by the way, I'll repeat this time and time again when watching Supernatural, but isn't it crazy that they have to go someplace on the smallest of hunches? And I'm sure we don't see it, but there are times when they show up and there is no case. It was just fictional and a ghost, like a campfire tale, like I said, not real. So that's just an interesting idea of how much time is probably wasted in between. It's amazing we've probably seen in real time the amount of cases they've experienced, because some cases take as long as like 2 weeks, I'm sure, maybe even longer. So it's been about a year since Jess has died and the general show has begun. And there's about 24 episodes in a season. This is about 17. If each case only took a minimum of 2 days, that includes driving to the case and then hearing about it, maybe we'll say like a week or something like that. That's still at least half the year. There's a potential that half of those cases we're not seeing filmed were duds. So you got to be very patient to be a hunter. You got to deal with the idea of potential death at all times, and patience. And loneliness and identity fraud. But that being said, the boys decide to go check this out, and they even have an interesting conversation about their dad. At this point, with the same dad arc that they're working on with John Winchester, they finally have run into him and have that confirmation, and at least can kind of cool down for the time moment that they don't need to hunt for him. They know he's alive, they understand the stakes, and why they need to stay away from him. So, when we go back to the fun idea of them being little detectives in a way, and ghost hunters, they go back to what they know because they're trying to kill time. So it's a great little segue to our kind of like, I don't know what to call it, the formula that makes Supernatural what it is. They also have a conversation, the boys talk about their views towards ghost websites, which is interesting, called hellshoundlair.com. Such a big misstep that you can't actually Google Hell's Hound Lair. I mean, Supernatural is so big that even though they haven't spoken about ghost facers in a couple seasons, let's be real here. People would fucking go on that shit all the time. It would become its own separate forum. Honey, have you never heard of a Squarespace promotional advert on any of these podcasts that are out there in the world? Save yourself 20%. Anyway, but the boys talk about how they don't find it reputable, they think it's all funny. And I think the main reason why they think it's funny is not only is a lot of the information misknown on these types of websites, but these people are messing around for fun with something they consider quite serious. And something I want to just put out there, I'm sure most of you know this, but it is interesting that they have that viewpoint because pretty much any paranormal investigator I've kind of experienced, they do have a fascination with ghosts and this type of world, but they are very serious about it. They understand that demons can exist and possessings and terrible hauntings and physical afflictions. Like, they understand what they are going into, and there's no insensitivity about it, is what I'm saying. They're not doing it for fame. In fact, it's quite difficult to make a living off of this type of shit. But moving forward, The boys start their investigation by questioning the victims, the kids who came upon this girl. And it's so funny that today I'm filming this, it's 4:20, because these kids had the worst fucking memory ever. You think from experiencing the traumatizing event of seeing someone hung, something so awful like that, and I'm sorry if I didn't say a trigger warning for that, but you think they would iconically have certain clear definitions of her in their mind. Like her blonde hair, she was white, she was about this weight, so to speak. But all of them get it a little bit off. Again, reflecting back to the idea of the whisper down the lane idea. In addition to that concept, oh my god, can you hear the fucking blue jay? Guys, so sorry about this blue jay. It just loves my house. And I hope it's saying something really important, like, I love your podcast. Please record this episode. I'm taking this request. I'd love to take requests, Mr. Blue Jay, but you're going to have to be quiet while I record. Anyways, the kids all give a different reading of certain characteristics of this girl. And so while their reviews and accounts are not consistent, and it shows that idea, again, back like what I said about the whisper down the lane idea, they both 100% seem authentic in their beliefs. Like, they for sure experienced it. It really did happen. No one's making anything up. They get led to the main guy who we saw, Craig, who kind of led them into the house. He mentioned how he heard it from a cousin. And we get the general background story about what the tale is. So the background lore of this particular ghost and this house haunting is that in the 30s, during the Depression, there was this guy named Murdoch. He was a farmer, and because it was the Depression, his farm crops were failing, and they were starving, and they didn't have enough money. He was clearly a very strict and not unkind father, and he decided it would be best, and this is psychotic, that he would kill his daughters. It would be better if he took them out and did it in one kind of go, and instead of them starving to death, which is the most insane type of perspective, especially with no permission gotten. I think it's different if it's like you all agree, like, let's just go out this way, but clearly they did not agree upon that. So he strung them up, and that's the background lore of why he picks these girls. It seems misogynist, but if you see the tale, well, it's still pretty misogynist, but the general idea is just that he probably confuses these young girls for his daughter. Which doesn't make sense, though, because why would he seem like an extra volatile, angry spirit? Wouldn't he seem more concerned, panicked that he somehow is saving you? He wouldn't be so sadistic and somehow getting pleasure out of it. Well, anyways, as they're going into this, they decide to investigate the house, and we get some background information. And I wonder if some of this information is true. Like, they tried to do EMFs, but they couldn't get proper information about it because the power lines were messing with their EMF stuff. I'm curious if any paranormal investigators deal with that type of thing, if that's something that they regularly have to fight with, or are they far enough in the house? Like, how close do their machines get affected by the power lines? Like, how close do they have to be? Actually, if you want to know about that, I have another podcast called Mystery Storytime Podcast, and we're actually getting ready to, interview a couple paranormal investigators. So you should come by and, ask any questions you would like us to ask them, because we want to go into that whole, like, discrediting any myths or getting into just, like, how did they get into this, so on and so forth. Anyway, so we learned that EMF readings were being affected by the power lines. We see that there's a bunch of symbols everywhere, but they're very conflicting because some of the symbols didn't even come into existence within the same decades or centuries of each other. Like, some are hundreds of years old in concepts from different cultures, mixed with some symbols that are, came in San Francisco in the 60s or like emerged, came to be. And in addition to all of that, the paint seems rather fresh. So this doesn't make sense that this ghost would have left it as some sort of warning, or in some situations, this is so fucked up and weird, but some crazy people out there want to actually open a demon portal. They want to do the whole rituals. That's what they believe in. And the rituals, enough things are aligning with sigils and, like I said, candles and so on and so forth, that they're able to make these ideas to come into fruition. with all these conflicting ideas and the fact that it's so fresh, but they're saying that this ghost would have come into existence many decades ago, so it being unleashed by these symbols doesn't match up as well timeline. They're already sitting here skeptical of its power, or, what is it, like, is this made up or not? It's still going back to that idea of, is this campfire tale just a campfire tale, or is it real? And they are not quite sure, because the kids say it was real. They seem like they're telling the truth. But at the end of the day, they're not getting anything to prove it to be true. And the thing with this particular show is they get tons of actual evidence to back up their points before they go into anything. They're not just like setting houses ablaze randomly for fun, like in Evolution I just recently covered, when our dear beloved Sean William, what's his name? If you see him, you'll know what I'm talking about. When he lights a house on fire to practice being a firefighter. So anyways, during this experience, they run into ghost facers. I love that they accuse the other boys of being, kind of messing around in something they don't understand, and that they're the professionals. I could go on and on, but there's better ghost facer episodes where it kind of amplifies their personalities even more. So I'll save it for those episodes to really go into them. But please go check out this episode. It's so funny. They're lovable know-it-alls. Goofy, clearly in it for the fame and fortune, but a little bit of a belief, a little bit of everything. And they're trying to school the boys. We also learn by pure coincidence they run the Hellhound lair site that Sam checked out. And again, I think it's so funny that Dean teased him for this, when, like, Sam had a good point. It's like, well, we have to get our information somehow, so why wouldn't we check everywhere, including sites that seem like they're not always true or they're not credible. They decide to, while they're trying to wrap up this information, unfortunately, another girl on her own who's investigating the place actually gets strangled. So at this point, with a body found and a real girl who died, they have all the proof they need to know, while things aren't aligning and making sense, clearly something's happening here and they can't ignore it. They try to go into the house again, but they can't really, because cops at this point, with the word that a girl possibly died, but they didn't find the body, and then another girl actually proven to be dead, they are protecting the house, which is really interesting. That doesn't usually happen a lot. But then again, I can't think of a lot of places where people say haunted houses exist and then people actually die in them, so that's kind of nuts. I think the craziest thing that happened was it was a Kindred Spirits, my other podcast, and I covered recently, where, what is it called? The Velasquez, the Venezuelan house. Anyways, it's a house where, unfortunately, a serial killer back in the day, he ended up axing up a whole family, and the murderer and the family still exist in the house. And one paranormal investigator went in there and was legitimately, like, he blacked out, and he was stabbed in his shoulder, and it showed proof in the paranormal investigator community that spirits can really motherfucking fuck you up, and it's scary and dangerous, which is why I thought it was a great topic, the whole episode in general, how they were focusing on who was more professional and who was more in danger than the other, because either way, no matter who you want to see is in the right, I think the point still remains that in real life, it is dangerous. It is scary. Sometimes you can actually get full-on physical attacked, and in some cases, it's just a matter of being haunted in a way where, like, some ghosts can make you terribly ill, or make accidents happen, or feed on your psyche and your fear over many weeks. I mean, it's awful, the levels that you experience. And some people experience paranormal attacks and they're not even in the paranormal community. They're just an innocent person renting an apartment. And, people who choose to go into this lifestyle in this world, like, they really understand what they are up against. I don't think you should do any of this stuff without some sort of understanding of what you are going into, protection, safety, and not even from just ghosts, but some places where you could investigate. You never know if there's dangerous squatters, or people that could be following you, especially if you're a girl by yourself or anybody in a vulnerable situation. So there's a lot of dangers going on, and I think it's really fun that they explored that avenue, because in Supernatural, they explore everything from myths like werewolves to the practicalities of real life ghost hunters. So that's what's really fun about the show. So girls strangled, we've got ghost facers introduced, and they decide, okay, we're going to go investigate the house, but of course the ghost facers pop up at this exact time, and Dean's a genius and says, who are you going to call, teasing the boys, while simultaneously getting them caught, because those poor goons are not very graceful in what they do, and they get caught by the cops. That gives enough time for Dean and Sam to go into the house. Now they think they're going to just do what they normally do. Okay, we're going to burn the bones, we're going to shoot the spirit, whatever, with rock salt. But insanely enough, this spirit that is real, they've seen it come into, its apparition come into existence, so it's real at this point, there's no doubt that it exists, is unaffected by rock salt. They are in immediate panic mode when it is unaffected by it. There's an immediate like, oh shit, I forgot everything I've trained for. What the fuck do I do? It shows that the paranormal world is so fucking weird that you could have a job like they have, where they go on dozens upon dozens of cases every year since they were probably like 8, and there's still new stuff to discover. Because, like, let's be real, and I'll just keep saying this, but I believe that ghosts exist, and that everything that's kind of supernatural and crazy and unexplainable is almost like probably on like a parallel dimension that it's right there, but we just can't see it, and sometimes it shows itself, or sometimes we become more psychically inclined or whatever. But the point is, just saying that it's on another parallel dimension, that it is here, I think that opens the idea range that, like, literally anything could fucking happen whenever. I think even the idea of ghosts and what they can do could evolve in time. And that being said, it makes absolute sense that they would, oh my god. Fucking noise upon noise. Sorry about that. That they could, I'm so sorry, I'm just losing my train of thoughts. Oh, that suddenly being immune to rock salt could happen or could exist. Either way, Dean, of course, he's not accepting that. And he does some more digging. I love when he realizes one of the symbols the whole episodes he keeps referring to is quote-unquote familiar. He ends up realizing it's a Blue Oyster Club symbol, which I'm like, oh my god, I love it. I wish they had done a Prince symbol. And they end up talking to Craig and finding out that it was all a hoax the first time. It was just a joke he did with his cousin. In fact, the first girl we saw strangled, she wasn't really strangled. It was a fake act that the cousin did. So she's alive, she's fine. They just hung some stuff up, painted some symbols from a website, and it was all just meant to be fun. And he feels awful that someone really is dead. Like, that is not what he had intended. I mean, I like that Dean doesn't even, sometimes Dean will really manhandle and not patronize, but like, put someone in their place if they're messing around with something they don't understand. And this was one of those times where like he didn't do that shit because he understood that this person didn't mean any harm. It was a fucking accident. But I will continue to say this. Do not mess around with shit that's the occult. I think it's fine to talk about it. It's interesting. I mean, that's why I talk about it with my partner. But it's not something you want to fuck with because you don't know what has power, doesn't have power, and so on and so forth, which we're about to get into. So they realize, okay, well, what is it? Well, one of the symbols is either called, I think the symbol itself is called this, or the entity is called a Tulpas. Now, Tulpases are kind of interesting because you could even say, and I mean, they say this even at the end of the episode, but I would say that a lot of spirits evolve, change, exist in general as a Tulpas. That becomes a conversation within itself. So the example he uses is that back in the day, this incident happened where 20 monks got together and they thought of a golem, and apparently this golem existed in thin air with enough belief. And that's just 20 monks focusing really hard. If you combine this sigil, this energy that it represents, this, how we talked about before in sigils with Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, their representation of subliminal messages and how it kind of talks to your subconsciousness, mixed with people thinking about Murdoch the ghost and the lore and enough people believing in it, it can create a ghost within itself, give it more power, more energy. So that's why this thing is evolving. That's why its narrative is changing from hanging up girls to fighting you with an axe to being impervious to rock salt. It's an idea that exists. It is still a spirit, but it's a spirit that doesn't have a bones to bury your body. So you have to do a little bit of kind of like crazy thinking in this way. So this is where they're really creative and they have some interesting solutions. They end up telling the ghost facers, and they even do it in a clever way because they know the ghost facers, if they make it too obvious what they're trying to do, they won't do what they want them to do. So they trick them into potentially putting on their website this information that the ghost is impervious to like iron or rock salt or something. So finally this ghost will have something that can hurt it and they can take it down. But unfortunately, the boys didn't put it up in time, and when they go to battle the ghost the second time, this thing is alive and real. And it can still totally kick their ass and is impervious to everything. They managed to save the ghost facers, which they're not bad guys. Like, I don't blame them for wanting to save the ghost facers. And even, I think when they pranked them at the ends, it kind of almost felt like a lovable supernatural fraternity, because there is something kind of adorable that I felt like even Sam and Dean did not hate them. There was something gullibly sweet about them. Well, they saved the boys by, in Dean's genius thinking, let's burn the house because, one, Murdoch can't leave the house, so if there's no house to haunt. And they do end this particular case in a bit of a sketchy way, because even Sam says, well, what do we do if it happens again? What if the idea evolves? And will they say, well, the reality is that we can't do anything about it now, we'll just deal with it when it comes. Nothing is ever really sealed off or finished forever. I mean, think about how many hunters exist in this fictional world, and they have not fully saved the world from every supernatural type of creature, spirit, some sort of existence. There's never going to be a conclusive end. In fact, actually, the man himself, who you should totally check out, Johnny L. Tenney, who is like, God, he's just such a wealth of occult knowledge. He often says that you will not finish many cases and situations or investigations in a conclusive way. There is not a lot of closure when it comes to this department. And that's why I felt okay with the ending. And I thought they made a really great point, because Sam even talked about the idea of belief and how many things have they fought were only existed because people believed. And that's something I want to just take a moment and talk about. One thing that if you ever come in contact with something supernatural, it's funny because some things totally do exist. They are real, whether it be a demon or a person that died and is now haunting the house, so it's now a spirit. But the more you are afraid, some things feed off of that, and that gives it power. The more you acknowledge it, that's, again, giving it power. I saw one case on Kindred Spirits, and I've heard of many other cases where people ended up being really afraid of a place, and when they put into the house a lot of positive energy, the activity stopped. Sometimes the ritual of having a priest come over doesn't really do anything. It's just that you believe it did something. So that idea in itself is interesting, but I think it only brings up more this proven parapsychological idea that because belief has power, belief, intent, it can affect energy. That's what witches believe. That's what people practicing witchcraft believe. Then I always have the belief that, well, with that knowledge, we can use that to our benefit. If you want to become someone's more confident, if you quote unquote fake it till you make it and put that belief system out there, eventually you will become more confident. That's what a lot of people believe in the idea of the law of attraction, or just generally manifesting. So I just think it's a cool idea. It might help you if you feel like fear or anxiety is bringing you down. And just so you know, when I say this, if you're being haunted by an actual ghost, or you're just someone in your life that's suffering from anxiety, I more than fucking can relate to that or understand that. Know that when I'm putting out the idea that you should just try to believe in being calm or believe in being confident, I don't say that in a out of touch way. I'm not saying that's not hard, because when I put out this advice, it's just practical, real advice I've heard from other paranormal investigators and witches and so on and so forth. But it's not said with a grain of salt. People do understand that, like, some people have been fucking haunted by a growling fucking demon, and they're told you have to stop being afraid because you're giving it power. And you're like, well, how can I stop fucking being afraid if I'm being growled at? Or how can I stop having anxiety if I have reasons to be anxious? And somehow you kind of have to start with believing is seeing. So that's like the main idea of this episode, is believing is seeing. And you can bring that into a real world concept into your benefit, whether helping you overcome something or helping you accomplish something. So it's just a cool idea I love talking about. Do love the end of this episode. The ghost facers get a fake call from Sam, the producer, who they think they're all hoity-toity, going off, getting a video game made about them, a movie. They think they've made it, and it's just a mean trick Sam played on them. It's kind of like where Sam and Dean and their prank war come to an end. It's a truce, they say. But for me, it's like they put their powers combined with Dean and a fish in the back of their car, and Sam's again prank of the producer. To me, it feels kind of like the closest anyone's gonna get to a hug from these boys. These poor messed up boys. Anyways, guys, please become a Patreon supporter today. I would love this to become my full-time job. Subscribe, tell a friend. I love you in the most platonic way possible. Talk to you next episode. Bye!